Welcome to Tory Talks. I'm your host, Sam Murray, and this is my co-host, Ian Fisher.
Hello.
And today's date is the 21st of February, so that's the date of filming. Today we're going to discuss the Cabinet Reshuffle, the BBC, immigration policy, and the full council that happened this week for Ipswich Borough Council. So, how has your week been?
Busy. It's always, because we've had a full council meeting this week, it's always really busy. Also had really interesting public meeting, which can always be a bit daunting, about the vital issue of parking around a school. It was resident led, and I was there as a councillor, so you've always got to worry a little bit because you don't know how many people are going to be there. But no, that was quite well attended. Like I say, we had the full council meeting on Wednesday, which always takes a lot to prepare for. There's a lot. There was a big council meeting this week. It was the full budget meeting, so which we'll come on to later. So certainly, it's nice to round off the week with something a little bit more relaxing, like this podcast, which I hope is going to be the first of many.
So you think it's relaxing being around me?
Well, I'm not too sure about that being around you. This is certainly an easier crowd than the crowd I face at the council or at the public meeting. So this is like heaven because there's nobody the other side talking back to me.
Yeah, and we'll just mute the comments, I think, afterwards. No,
Maybe so.
Yeah, I've had a bit of an interesting week myself. Conservative Women's Organisation contacted me. They are doing a new branch, which is the Enterprise branch. So they want to highlight that a lot of women involved with politics are from business backgrounds, and so they've asked me to be the Suffolk representative on that branch. So that's quite interesting. I'm waiting to find out all the information about that, when they're going to launch it, but that was quite nice that they touched base with me on that. And then a local radio station has asked me if I will do a segment on International Women's Day.
Okay, that's something that's not that big in this country at the moment, isn't it?
No.
It's getting bigger though each year.
Yeah.
I used to work with lots of, I call them East European, they will say Central European ladies, and massive in Poland, Czech Republic, really big International Women's Day. They celebrate it. Partners will buy their wives, girlfriends flowers, presents. It's quite well celebrated on the continent. I think it's quite well celebrated in Australia as well, believe it or not.
So, yeah.
But it's something that's kind of missed us out, and I believe that the only reason it's got bigger over here is because we have such a growing population of people from Europe that are bringing the celebration over. It's another excuse for a card. You don't see the cards in the shops yet. You don't see Happy International Women's Day cards in the shops yet. And I won't even begin to ask the question, what about International Men's Day? Because you're going to tell. I thought you were going to say to me it's International Men's Day the other 364 days of the year.
No, but there is actually an International Men's Day. I can't remember when it is off the top of my head. But I thought that was nice that someone considered me as an inspirational woman in Ipswich. So that's quite nice. I've got to now think about what kind of tracks I want to do. So of course I've agreed to doing that. But yeah, so that was a nice surprise this week. But this week has been really interesting for politics-wise. And I say that every week, don't I? And then you're just like, it's not, Sam, you're just a pleaser.
Sam, you're a political geek, so every week is interesting for you, politicals. But also, not only that, you're experiencing things, a lot of these things for the first time. So, or not necessarily for the first time, but the first time when you're really involved and really interested. So it was quite interesting, the recent Cabinet Reshuffle. To me, as I'm in my middle 40s, I've seen a few Cabinet Reshuffles, and I must admit, they don't really usually interest me that much. I suppose this one is always going to be a little bit more interesting because it's the first proper Boris Johnson cabinet, as I would say. But certainly, I think your infectious attitude on it rubbed off on me, and it was, and I suppose I took more of an interest in it than I would do usually.
I was bombarding you with text messages all day.
Yeah, I think you forgot that I work in a normal job, and you work for a Conservative association where you can talk about politics all day long, and I actually have to do something that isn't politics. It was, to be honest, there weren't that many shocks in my opinion. Obviously there was one big shock, which most people weren't expecting. I'm not too sure how much of a shock that really was. Actually, Sajid Javid leaving the Chancellor role, considering the previous few weeks where there'd obviously been some kind of clashes between the two. I'm not too sure I was that surprised. But what are your thoughts on the new appointments?
I don't know, because I predicted some bits and none of them came true. So it just shows how little I know about it. But I knew Andrew Leadsom was obviously going to be at risk. But I had this sense that she was going to become our party chairman. So I knew she was going to be booted, but I thought she was going to become our party chairman. And that was mainly because of how she handled her campaign. She gave massive experience and exposure to young Conservatives, and a lot of her campaign before the election was about young Conservatives. And I just genuinely thought that was then her move to become party leader, and then see where that goes. But it just didn't happen, and I was really shocked. So that's what I thought would happen with Andrew Leadsom. Julian Smith, I didn't see that one coming. That's now Brandon Lewis.
I think Julian Smith is the only one I'm probably a little bit disappointed about. He'd done particularly well in the Northern Ireland office, but then you have to say a lot of what, and perhaps this goes against what I said originally, but a lot of what he did, a lot of what he perhaps taken credit for, a lot of that hard work had been done in the months before he'd actually started. Okay. So of course it happened on his watch that the Stormont Assembly came back, so he's the one that obviously took some of the credit of it, but previous ministers and also lots of other people took quite an active part in that campaign to get it back. So I think the one thing that everybody should realise on any cabinet reshuffle really is that it's not like recruiting people for a job. So I think sometimes when you look at Twitter and you read different people's opinions, everybody's got a different opinion on who might be better for a certain position. This person might be better as Defence Secretary because they've got experience of being in the army or whatever. I know you like Penny More, don't you? But I think the really important thing, in my opinion anyway, is not necessarily who is going to be the best at the job. I think you've got to be pretty clued up as to what a minister actually does. The minister isn't there to know everything about his or her department. That's what the civil servants are for. But really I think the interesting thing that's come out of this is that Boris is obviously putting his people, as it were, in place. Now, whether you think that's a good idea or not, any team manager doesn't really want to have dissenting voices in their team.
Yeah.
They want to be challenged, they want to be pushed, but also dissenting voices can cause a lot of problems and a lot of issues. And I think the thing that you're seeing now is a lot of the people that seem to be coming into cabinet now are maybe people that have worked with Boris before, or certainly worked very closely with him in the last year or two. And a lot of those people are getting rewarded for their loyalty. I think it's got a lot of bad press because this is only the same as every single Prime Minister has ever done. Prime Ministers don't put somebody into the cabinet that disagree with them and know they're going to cause them trouble.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. So I'm not too, I don't see it a problem as Boris putting his people in there. That's exactly what it is. You want a strong team around you, but you have to remember the important part is the civil service are the ones that are supposed to have the ultimate knowledge of the department.
Yeah.
And that's what that's the system we have at the moment. So it doesn't matter to me as much if somebody going into a department isn't as clued up as what somebody else may be.
Yeah. I mean, I was glad, obviously I work for Suffolk Coastal, of course I was obsessed, so that's why I was keeping an eye on things. But also, my girl Therese, she has been in the media probably every week as potentially losing her job ever since Boris become Prime Minister. And so, just waiting to find out official, is she still in the cabinet? was, a little bit tense, and I'm glad that she's still there. But I thought she'd be moved over to DEFRA. I think that's where she was originally, wasn't it? So I was surprised that she was still working pensions, but talking to her about it, she's very passionate about it. So I'm just glad that she wasn't one of the ones that was booed.
Okay, controversial opinion now. I don't necessarily agree with your statement there. I don't think she's suited to work on pensions. Now, I like Therese. I think Therese was perfectly suited to the DEFRA role.
Yeah, so I thought we all thought she was going to be moving over there.
But not only that, I think it's suited because of the fact that she's an MP in a semi-rural constituency, and all the other constituencies around her, with the exception of Ipswich, are rural constituencies. So I think she would have had a good voice for people in Suffolk doing that. I see the DWP as a bit of a poison chalice. While we're bringing out universal credit, nobody's going to get any plaudits for running the DWP.
No.
The only thing you're going to do is perhaps be congratulated for avoiding any disasters. It's not a role I see her in, and it's not a role, although she has been doing it, and this is probably, I'm not meaning to anger you now with what I say, I can't think of anything she's done as the Cabinet Minister.
Okay.
In that role. And to me, I should always be able to think, now I know she hasn't done it for very long, so hopefully I'll think something different in 6 months' time. But I can't think of any policy statement she's made, any big speeches she's made about that. I think she always sounds far more passionate talking about rural issues.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I thought she was going to be moved back over to DEFRA. That's where her passion is. But talking to her, and again, that might be because I'm so new into it. I talk to MPs when I meet them about certain things, and they have an understanding, and it might be because she's a cabinet minister, so there's the difference. But when I talk to her about stuff, she just seems to be really, really knowledgeable about DWP and also passionate. Not as much as DEFRA, but passionate all the same. But then again, like I've spoken to Matt Hancock, and he's all about the NHS, isn't he? So I'm not surprised he's still there.
They've got to be, and I think finally on the cabinet, really, we can't finish this subject and not talk about the new Chancellor. I've heard him speak a few times, and I've always rated him, as you'll know. I've spoken about him in the past. I think he's extremely intelligent, which is quite needed in that role. I think he's extremely intelligent, but I think he's extremely enthusiastic as well. And I think he'll do well in the role, and I think he's somebody that can grow into it. And people are saying, "Oh, he hasn't got any experience." He's actually, he was the number two to Sajid Javid in the Treasury anyway.
Yeah.
He's worked in the financial industry field, so it's not as though the guy's a novice. It'll be interesting to see what his first budget is like, which should be
in the 11th?
In a few weeks. I don't think they've confirmed the date yet. All I know is it's March. It may be postponed a little bit.
I think it's the 11th.
It's quite daunting. I was thinking 16th. It's quite daunting to have to come up with a budget in that short period of time. But
yeah, for sure.
No, I think we'll have to wait and see. The jury's out.
But you called it.
Well, there you go. So I think Rishi Sunak is. Last year, I said during the leadership campaign that I said I was disappointed that Rishi Sunak hadn't put his name forward, because I actually think he'll make an excellent leader of our party. And I'll take money with anybody now, actually, if they want to. I'll take money with you that he will be a future leader of our party.
Ooh, heard it here first.
There you go.
So, other hot topic this week is the BBC. And I think we have difference of opinion on this one, so it'd be quite interesting.
And your opinion is?
Scrap it, boot it, get rid of it. R.I.P. BBC.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna use the part of our title here. I'm gonna conserve the BBC, as I'm a Conservative. It can't survive without change.
Mm-hmm.
It can't survive without some kind of alteration to how it's funded. But I think the BBC, and we perhaps don't appreciate it as much from inside this country as other people do appreciate what we've got. I don't think we'd appreciate it till we lost it. Having a broadcaster that isn't paid for by an individual or paid for by a group and therefore doesn't have its own agenda is something which the rest of the world looks on with envy. And I don't think there are many things that the rest of the world look on in our country and are really envious of. The NHS is one, but the BBC is definitely one. And I'm not that surprised that people from different countries hold the BBC in far higher regard than people in this country. But I do think as well that if you spend a lot of time on social media, it's very difficult not to have the opinion that the BBC isn't doing very well at the moment. Yes, I use social media a lot, but I don't necessarily believe most of what I read on there. If you speak to the average person on the street that isn't on Twitter and doesn't do Facebook, they don't think the BBC is doing a bad job. Let's face it, for a public service broadcaster, every Labour supporter on Twitter thought the BBC was biased towards the Tories before the last election, and every Conservative supporter on Twitter thought that the BBC was biased towards Labour in the last election. Surely that shows that the BBC are doing the right job.
No, and I agree with elements of what you're saying. I just don't think it's fit for purpose anymore. And I think I used to absolutely love the BBC because of mainly its dramas. Whenever you watch a BBC drama, you knew it was the BBC. They, by far the best dramas came from the BBC, and that's across the world. And I will argue with anyone about that because it's just brilliant. But now I look at things like I love Netflix, and I watch Prime, and I watch a lot of TV, and I just think there's just real competition for them, and they don't seem to have stepped up their game. I think the BBC have refocused their shift on trying to reach target audiences that they just won't reach. They've spent a hell of a lot more money now on things that are like their online services. Their target range is between 18-year-olds and 35-year-olds, but they're only tapping into, I think it's about 8% of the target audience of who they're actually tapping into. But the vast majority of their money, apart from BBC One, is now going into these online services. And I see the online services because obviously I am an online person, and it's pumping out these woke agendas that it's just not what the BBC needs to do. It needs to regroup and discover what it was that made everyone fall in love with it. And also, I think the trust in the BBC has gone. There's been a lot of scandals over the years, recent years, that I think people now look at the BBC in a completely different light to what they used to. And I don't know whether they can regain the trust of the public anymore.
Okay, so we'll come back to scandals, but it's funny because as you were talking there, I was actually thinking that the very things that you think are harming the BBC at the moment are the things that I think highlight the BBC in the best light possible. Okay. So, correct. I don't disagree with you there. The BBC is known for producing excellent dramas, period dramas, all kinds of dramas, and that are watched worldwide and win awards. But you have to remember, that's not what it's there for. That's not what the BBC is there for. The BBC is not there to produce programmes that get huge, massive audiences. It's a public service broadcaster. So the fact that it does produce programmes for very small demographics of the population is exactly what it's for. So, who else? Their programmes See Here, which is obviously for people with hearing difficulties and sight difficulties. What other broadcaster is going to make something like that? They're not, because not many people are going to watch it, so they're not going to get very many money for the adverts. Who's going to have a radio station like BBC Six that plays to it's becoming more and more popular? But when it started, but when it started, it was a very specific genre of music. So yes, there are Amazon Prime, Netflix, other subscription channels, different ways for people to watch their content these days. But the BBC's not there to be in competition with these people. Just because Netflix is now doing this and Prime is now doing this doesn't mean the BBC has to do it. The whole premise of the BBC is that it does what other people aren't doing because it's a public service broadcaster. So, yeah, it might be that the current funding model for the BBC doesn't necessarily work because most younger people, well, certainly works at the moment, but isn't going to work in 30 years' time because most younger people watch their content online.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily have a TV license. And as you know, to watch iPlayer online now, you have to obviously type in whether you've got a license or not. They do checks. So unless we find a different way of funding the BBC, in 20 or 30 years' time, maybe even quicker than that, the number of people paying a licence fee is going to drop drastically. So then, because let's remember that big period dramas and big dramas that you say you like the BBC for, they're expensive. That's expensive television. Yeah. Okay, and it could be that that's what the BBC can't afford, and it could be that the BBC has to turn around and say, do you know what? That's what Netflix is for. That's what Prime is for. Yeah. Let's concentrate on, not scrap BBC, but let's get the BBC doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is a public service broadcaster. Let's think of the things that the BBC does which are revered worldwide. And that is the news service of the BBC is revered worldwide. Whether you think it's got an agenda or not, it's difficult to say it hasn't got an agenda at all. But what you have to remember is that it's got nowhere near as much of an agenda as every other broadcaster.
So you trust the BBC more than any other broadcaster?
I've certainly not come across a broadcaster. Obviously, I don't know all the broadcasters in the world, but certainly I don't know of one where I can get my news content and it's going to give both sides of the story as far as possible. Every other broadcaster is owned by a group or company that have got their own agenda.
Yeah, but the problem with the BBC is, like, I think it's presented itself in a way that it used to be, where it was your trusted source, and I just don't think it's become that anymore. And so that's what I mean by the scandals as well. It's been heavily criticised in the past for being anti Israel. It has been criticised in the past for putting out a certain agenda when it comes to LGBT rights. Panorama used to be fantastic. I used to watch Panorama all the time. I trusted that. It was the one that exposed other people, but now the BBC are coming under fire on a regular basis, I feel, to be exposed for being very selective of what they're.
Do you think the BBC's changed or you've changed? That's an honest question.
I think I'm less trusting now than I was before. So, well, in my teens, I would go to the BBC for BBC Bite Size. It helped me with my GCSEs.
Okay, so let's just stop there a moment, because you just come up with something ideal. BBC Bite Size and all the educational programmes they make. You tell me who else is going to make those. Nobody's going to make them. Nearly every single school references or shows Newsround now. Who else is going to make a child-friendly news programme that's watched across the country?
However, we watched a clip very recently that was about horrible histories, which was pumping out, this is a BBC thing, saying that there was nothing for British people to be proud of. There's nothing that originated from Britain, and it was so selective, and that's where the change is you're educating children on something that's.
But can I say, the only reason you know about that is through Twitter. It's the only reason you know about it. I can't remember the name of the Nish Kumar. That's who was doing it. Nish Kumar and somebody else. Now, it caused a Twitter storm. Okay, if there was no Twitter, maybe 50,000 people would have watched this show, and nobody would have said anything about it. Now, that's not me saying it's right or wrong. Okay, and I've not once defended every show that's on the BBC, but it's an educational programme. Now, it might not be educating people the way you'd like them to be educated, but it's an educational program, and who else is going to do that content? And this is perhaps where I see the BB's future lying, in a slimmed down BBC that is doing the things that other broadcasters aren't doing. So maybe there won't be an EastEnders. So maybe there won't be do you know? I don't watch a lot of television. I was then trying to rack my brains and think of some of the good dramas that have been on the BBC in the last few years. I was going to say The Crown, but I think that's Netflix.
No, Killing Eve.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen any of these.
So Killing Eve, Luther, they're very good shows. Okay. But that's my original.
But I'm living my life. You see, I'm not watching these. But that's the thing. I don't feel for the BBC to survive, undoubtedly, with its funding system the way it is now, it cannot compete with the likes of Netflix, because Netflix and the main reason it can't compete is because of the way it's funded. The BBC have to block everybody from non-UK countries from being able to watch their content,
which is bonkers. That was raised yesterday, wasn't it?
So obviously you've got this strange issue where you could be a licensed fee payer and you could go on holiday abroad and you can't watch it, and that is the crazy thing. So you might find if they just slightly change the way the funding works, that actually the BBC may end up with more money than what it's got now and might still be able to offer the content that it did did before. But it's like, but that's what I mean by it's trying to be too much. So it's scrapping the over 75 free licence because it said it can't afford the £3.7 million it's going to cost every year. But because I did a little bit of research, the online agenda that they do, which only reaches 8% of their target audience, went from 182 million to 214 million pounds. So if they just cut back on that, which isn't working, they could have 3.7 billion.
No, million.
Yeah.
3.7 million. Well, so they could do that. You know, the BBC One reaches almost 70% of its target audience, or people across the UK. So BBC One is obviously working. You've got the likes of BBC Three. I don't know. You obviously don't watch it, but there's stuff that just doesn't.
So can I say
work.
Do
you watch BBC Three?
Well, BBC Three. I don't think you can watch BBC Three because BBC Three is all online now and has been for a while.
But you can get on iPad.
Which is online. So, funny enough, the channel I probably watch more than any other channel. This is how sad I am.
BBC Two.
No, worse than that. BBC Four.
Okay.
Because I found it has some really interesting stuff on there. But without the BBC, and I suppose, you know, we're discussing here the types of programmes they should be showing. Which really is good for me because maybe that thinks that maybe you think the BBC should exist but just in a different format. I think we should have a public service broadcaster in this country that is funded by the taxpayer. Now, I'm not saying it's funded through a licence fee where people go to jail if they don't pay it, but certainly we have a need for a public service broadcaster, and we can offer something that nobody else in the world currently offers and will ever dream of offering. And in this time when we are trying to make more of an impact in the world and across the world in countries where we haven't been for a while, you know, the BBC is still looked on. You might not trust it, but I can tell you now that a lot of countries rely on the BBC for its news content because they don't trust their own governments and they don't trust their own broadcasters. So actually, let's be proud of. There aren't many British institutions that are known across the world. This is one of them. So I think we should be proud of it and find a way that we can make sure it's still there in 50 years' time.
But it's, well, yeah, possibly, but I just don't think it is. There's stuff that just needs to, they're extending all this stuff. Like Silent Witness has been around for about 100 years. I mean, why don't they just get rid of it now? Enough is enough. It's just constantly pulling this show on that's just.
Yeah, but what you're doing is you're talking from a very, very personal level because you don't like Silent Witness.
No, I used to watch it religiously.
Yeah, you don't. But from what I know, and I only get this from what I read, what I believe is it's still one of the most watched shows on BBC. So why would you? But then again, I'll hark back to what I said earlier. The BBC shouldn't be there to get ratings. Commercial channels rely on ratings because the higher the rating, the more they can charge their adverts. The BBC doesn't have any adverts, so it shouldn't really matter if the BBC is making programmes that are only watched by a very small demographic, because to me, that's what the BBC is there for.
But how do you rate
to provide
success?
programming for the small demographic.
Yeah.
That is what it's there for. And so, this argument will rattle on, and I'm sure this will be in a future I'm sure this will be in a future podcast, because it will come up again at some stage, because we know the government's got it in its sights.
Yeah.
But something else that's happened this week, obviously, is the government announcing its new immigration policy.
Points-based system.
Which shouldn't have really surprised anybody, considering Boris has been very open about having a points-based immigration system. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, I don't know why people are so surprised about it. I'm not surprised at all by now there's this anti-Priti Patel narrative about how she's a bully and all this, and just it's become personal because people aren't liking her policy. But this was in the manifesto. We've been speaking about a points-based immigration system since Brexit, really. So we knew this was coming. I think it's a good thing. And we've spoken about it in the past about how you value people. And this surely highlights to everyone that we need to start valuing people and not just leaving it to immigrants to do the jobs that British people aren't prepared to do. And I think it's going to give us a kick up the bum as Brits to actually start doing these really hard jobs.
It's quite interesting, actually, because I've spoken to quite a few people about this, and especially considering most of my career I've spent in recruitment, and a lot of people I've recruited have been from overseas. So I've been able to get the opinions of people from all across the world, and it's been quite interesting, actually. I find that everybody knew we were going to have a new policy. The thing that's disappointed me the most about this is the way that perhaps some media outlets have reacted to it and almost branded it as a racist policy, when, funnily enough, the policy is very similar to policies they have in Canada and Australia, countries that they would never dream of calling racist. I think Michael Portillo said something last night on Question Time that I've actually been saying for quite some time, and I've been saying it throughout my career in working in recruitment. We should be embarrassed as a country that we have got careers that British people feel they're too good for. That we have got careers, we have brought up a whole generation to believe that certain jobs are only good for people from other countries. I'm not that old, but in summer holidays at schools, on Sunday mornings, we'd go fruit picking to make some money. And we might not do it every day of the week, because it was pretty much casual. Turn up, earn some money, go home again. You wouldn't find, well, I say you wouldn't find, that's a lie. Okay, you're not going to find more than a handful of British students now prepared to go and pick fruit. Now, to me, that's wrong. We need to start valuing some of our careers again, and we need to get back to teaching people that not everything is about getting a degree and doing certain jobs. I think I'm convinced that there's two things that have these two things happened at the same time. Freedom of movement from what they call the A8, and then it was later on the A10 countries. So countries from the European Union, like Poland, Czech Republic. This started in 2004, a very, very similar time to, at the same time, this country was going through a massive push to get youngsters to go to university, and convincing people that they had to have degrees. Those two things created a perfect storm then of a younger generation that didn't want to do manual jobs. I've spent 20 years trying to recruit people into manual work, and I can tell you now that less than 10% of the people I've recruited, and there must be in the thousands, over the last 20 years have been British. And that's something that hurts me every day, that we think that we can't provide people to do our own jobs. So, yeah, I'm all for an immigration policy which makes it fair across the board for people from across the whole world to have an equal chance to come into our country.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. And I also think that the generation you'll talk about is actually my generation, is the millennials, because we were put under immense pressure at high school of what university you're going to. There wasn't any other option. It was what university you're going to. This is the money you're going to be guaranteed to earn once you leave university. I never went to uni. I started working at Willis and then made my way up. But at the time, at 18, I was a cleaner in the morning, worked at Willis full time, and then I worked in bars in the evening. Wasn't on a lot of money, but I worked really, really hard just to keep my pokey little flat. And those who left university came out with an expectation, and then all of a sudden there wasn't a job at that level that they were promised. So, and I've met lots of people recently. Oh, I'm out of work. Okay, well, what jobs are you going for? Oh, there's no jobs. Okay, well, there's a cleaning job. There's this job. Oh no, I don't mean that. You shouldn't be given that choice. If you're fit enough to work, then go and get a job.
Well, you see, I don't disagree with you there, but I see it from a different angle. I'm more interested in why that person says, I don't want to do that job, I don't want to do that. And it's all about perception. It's because as a country, we have almost created people that have got a perception that jobs such as working in the care industry, such as working as a waiter, or such as working as a cleaner, are low-skilled, non-skilled, but they're not. And whether they are or they aren't, they're jobs that are needed to be done in this country. And I think it's not just these types of jobs where we have the issue. Look at all construction trades. Not enough people have gone into construction. So I think certainly in a few years' time, the immigration policy has got, I think it's got the potential to be really, really good for our country. But we have to have quite a big level of flexibility. There used to be something called the Seasonal Workers Agricultural Scheme. This was before we had lots of people from East Europe come over. And it was a scheme that run on a seasonal basis, hence the name. And there was a maximum number of people that were allowed over it. So there was a number of visas to be given out each year. And it was basically because we didn't have enough people to work in our seasonal industry of agriculture. Now, the government are bringing that back again.
Okay.
So farmers, food producers already know that the taps are going to be turned on in the periods that they need the extra staff, and then they're going to be turned off again. We already know that the NHS has got exemptions. So the points-based system, basically 70 points you need to get. You get points for certain things. Certainly you get points for what qualifications you've got. You get points for being able to speak English. You get points if you've actually got a job to come to and it's being sponsored. But more importantly is you get jobs for what skill level. You get points for what skill level the job is at. So jobs under a certain skill level won't get those points. So obviously people are thinking that, we won't be able to recruit people into those low-paid jobs because they won't be able to get the points. There's exemptions in place. So the government have announced exemptions for the NHS in certain careers. I think, I hear a lot of other industries. There was people on last night from the care industry, on Question Time last night, on the care industry and from hospitality. Now, part of my opinion is that a lot of it's laziness. There's a lot of lazy employers out there. I've always worked for an agency. There's a lot of lazy employers out there that find it easier to pick up the phone to an agency, so that agency will send them some cheap European staff than actually go out and find people themselves. there's a reason why the agricultural sector has got this scheme in operation. They've been lobbying the government for years, ever since Brexit was first on the agenda, because they knew they wouldn't be able to cope without it. And they knew there was a scheme in operation beforehand. These other industries haven't been lobbying the government anywhere near as much. But what the government have been doing is, so we'll take the care industry. Over the last few years, the government have brought in quite a lot of additional care training and care training packages. And I know because I used to work for a recruiter that we had a care agency. So it's far, far easier and free now to get qualified in care, things like infection control, moving and handling, those kinds of things. The qualifications you need, the base qualifications you need just to be able to go in and do the job at the bottom of the ladder in the care industry. You can go and get those now. If you weren't working, or if you were in a job and you're under a certain earning under a certain salary, there is free training available now to get retrained in those roles. That's why that industry hasn't got a scheme attached to it yet. Now, if not enough people sign up, the government is going to have to be flexible. And this is what I hope. A lot of the rhetoric from the government so far has been quite hard, and that they're not going to be flexible. But if we get to June or July and we haven't got the people that we need to have, we need to be able to have something to fall back on. Because if we don't, we could find certain industries really suffer.
Yeah, especially in care, which is what I'm concerned about.
Yes, but I suppose the big thing to remember is that unlike a lot of the doom mongers and the Remainers in this whole Brexit debate, a lot of people thought that the majority of Europeans were going to disappear and go home because Britain is such a nasty and toxic place to live for them. You know, like I said earlier before, I have lots of European friends just by nature through I've found them work. I know no more than one handful that have gone since the Brexit result, or even the Brexit referendum took place. There are over 3 million now Europeans that have applied for settled status in the country. So realistically, what we're saying is the people that are already here working in these industries are going to stay.
Yeah.
They're not going to go. So it's not as though we've got an issue right now at this minute that's going to become an issue now in the summer. It's more likely to be an issue next year and the year after as the numbers grow. You know, people have retired and you need to get new people into the industry. I think that's when you're going to see the changes, but that gives the government a little bit more time to perhaps change the attitude.
And education. I really do think that the massive problem with education is we're forcing people to go into to university. And I say this a lot to young Conservatives who say, oh, well, I can't get a job if I don't do a degree, and then I've got all this debt. And it's like, I've got a job perfectly fine without a degree. In fact, I was part of a graduate scheme, but I managed to hustle my way in, and I didn't have a degree. It's like it's not the be-all and end-all. And I think that if you have a degree, it should be on something like architecture or something that you need that extra knowledge. I don't think you need a degree for all the degrees that are out there. And I think there needs to be a change in education to change our mindset. And then that would then change our workforce. Yeah. So I think it starts with education. That would be good.
Yeah, you're correct. But it's a simple, just to wrap up on immigration, it's a simple supply and demand. The basic rule of economics, supply and demand. If you cut the supply off, the demand will increase, wages will rise because they will have to rise. And I suppose then people say, but the unintended consequence of that is that prices will rise. Yeah, but if wages are rising and prices are rising, then it kind of like equals each other out. But it does make the work more attractive for a British person. But certainly the immigration system as a whole, let's not forget that Boris won the election with an 80-seat majority. And he went into that election promising a points-based immigration system, and a massive thing on the doorsteps in that election and over the past 2 or 3 years has been freedom of movement.
Yeah.
And the unintended consequences of that.
Yeah. And let's not exploit other people.
Well, yeah, like I say, we should be embarrassed as a country that we believe that certain roles are only good enough for people from other countries, which is something that I actually did mention in my speech at our full council meeting on Wednesday. So
bravo on that.
Yes, so it was full council meeting at Ipswich Borough Council on Wednesday evening. It was the budget meeting, so obviously as Conservatives we're in opposition in Ipswich. Unfortunately, Ipswich is the only little blob of red in a sea of blue in Suffolk, and I just happen to be a councillor in Ipswich. So it's the meeting where they set the budget for the forthcoming year, but also you have to set a medium-term financial plan for the coming 4 years, which is supposed to, and it has to be a legally balancing budget, which is supposed to stop councils kind of like getting into the state that Northamptonshire County Council got into last year, where they ran out of money. We haven't seen, I think when that happened, there was a bit of a thought that this is going to be like a pack of cards. This is one has gone and now loads of councils are going to go. But I'm in a very, very small minority here. Now, Ipswich Borough Council is a second-tier council, so we are a two-tier council system. So we have a county council that deals with the more strategic things like adult social care, children's social care, a lot of the statutory powers where the pressures are. So district and borough councils, which is the level I'm at, haven't had anywhere near as much financial pressures put on them as tier 1 councils have. That's not to say that funding hasn't been cut, but because of the numbers, our budget is £22 million, our net budget is £22 million each year. So it's been possible for us to set up companies that are going to generate some income for us. Obviously, the county council has budgets approaching £500-600 million a year. There's no way it can set up a company that's going to make all that money for it. So, so the Labour set their budget on Wednesday, and it was disappointing to say the least. You were there. You heard it. You heard the leader, Councillor Ellesmere, obviously introducing his budget. What were your thoughts?
Well, I filmed it, so if anyone wants to waste 2 hours of their life, that will be on my YouTube channel. But this is the second time I've been to a full council budget, one that has the budget. And the first time I saw it, I was very disappointed. It feels like just an opportunity for everyone to pat each other on the back and say how amazing they are, how evil Conservatives are. Blame what they usually do, blame the county council for everything, talk about the national picture in a very selective way, and to make themselves look like they're absolute heroes for what they've achieved under the circumstances, if they've saved someone's life. So this time I fully expected it to happen, and that's what it was. It was very partisan. It was quite embarrassing. I think if a member of the public hadn't been to a council meeting before and they come to that particular one, I think they would look at councillors and be quite embarrassed, actually. And that's someone from outside.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I think the behaviour.
In what?
I think it's that whole congratulatory thing with the sniping that goes on, and then everyone's cheering.
If I can just come in, to me, it's the only council meeting during the year that probably echoes the Houses of Parliament.
I agree with you to a degree, but there's some behaviour that I just don't think is acceptable. There's a particular councillor who heckles people, he becomes worse in those meetings.
Yes, but like I say, this is what I'm saying to you, this is why I say it mirrors the Houses of Parliament, because you get that in the Houses of Parliament.
Yeah, you do.
And it's usually a very quiet, mundane affair, a council meeting. You've just got onto the budget a minute for Ipswich. It's really disappointing. It was really, really disappointing. There is a time when, the Labour Council, when announcing this budget, they had a list of 26 of their achievements, as it were, things that they'd done.
Yeah.
Now,
It's a bit
a
depressing.
lot of these cost money.
Mm.
So one of the things that I said was, if the finances were as tough as you're leading us to believe, you wouldn't have been able to do any of these 26.
Yeah.
But undoubtedly, they were things that they'd done. I agree with some of them. I think some of them are brilliant. I think others are, what did you do that for? But I thought the outlook for the future years was just really bleak and lacked any kind of
Vision,
aspiration, and I just thought there was so much more that could be done. It was almost like they remembered 3 nights before the budget meeting that we've got to. No, I know they didn't. That they remembered that. We've got to do a budget in 3 days. Let's do this, and this, and no thought had really gone into it. And I think Ipswich is crying out for a big project, a vision, something that Ipswich people can be proud of, and something that, Ipswich people can be quite negative sometimes, but then rightly so. They've had tough times recently, and I'm not here to stick up for the county council. We had the Upper Royal Crossings project, which was shelved.
Yeah.
Money promised to spend in Ipswich didn't happen. We had the Northern Bypass, didn't happen. We've had the Borough Council, Labour spending £3.5 million on the Cornhill project, didn't happen. We were promised that 2 new restaurants were going to be on the Cornhill in council-owned buildings, didn't happen. And it seems to me that the council in Ipswich seems to be very, very good and quick at making announcements of what's going to happen, but then it's not happening. And I think Ipswich people feel quite let down, and I think that's why they need something to grab hold of. Funnily enough, I was speaking, one of the questions we asked at the council meeting was, would this council consider investing in anaerobic or aerobic digesters? Really boring subject. It's a way of treating food waste.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a way of treating food waste. It doesn't get rid of it, but it has an end product. It has a byproduct. So in aerobic digesters, the byproduct it's like a compost. It's not compost. It's like a compost, and it can be used as a fertilizer. With an anaerobic digester, the byproduct is a biogas that is used as fuel and can be used to either directly as fuel or go back to the national grid. Now, undoubtedly, food waste is a massive issue, proper emotive subject of our time. And our Labour Council declared a climate emergency only 3 or 4 months ago because they wanted to appear to be better than the government. Instead of just adhering to the government's policy of being carbon neutral by 2050, they decided to say 2030. But they've done nothing.
No, I know.
And there was nothing announced in this budget. What we wanted to do, we asked the question about these digesters because we know they're out there on the market. We want to see Ipswich and this is the kind of thing I want to see for Ipswich, something that we can be proud of. Now, I'm not saying everybody's really interested in the environment. I know a lot of people are. But if we have something to grab hold of, so why can't Ipswich be the first town in the country to have zero food waste?
Yeah.
Why can't Ipswich be the first town in the country to have all electric buses? Why can't we have some kind of ambition that we're going to reach? For too long, this council has tried to be second best. Let's compete with Norwich for shopping. Let's compete with Colchester for shopping. We're not going to do that. We need to focus on something else that we can make people proud of being from Ipswich again.
But that's why I found it just very depressing, and they pat each other on the back as if they've achieved something. So that's what I meant by that, is that they haven't. And also the answers you get back, they're not genuine answers. It's like if you were to ask me that question as a councillor, I'd do some research. Obviously the answers are prepared for them, I'm assuming, to a degree.
Yes.
But I would look into it and I would speak with passion. I mean, there is a councillor who I don't necessarily always agree with what she says, but she's massively passionate about
I know
her
who you're
cause.
talking about. You're talking about Carol Jones.
Carol Jones.
Yeah.
And she clearly knows her stuff. So
Yes.
when you ask her a question, you're going to need half hour for the answer.
But it's a good answer. I
But-
agree with you totally.
And then you get other people that are just like, the answer was, well, people shouldn't waste their food. A lot of the food waste is from people that have bought stuff that have never even opened the packaging. Okay, that's not answering the question though. You know, just saying, oh well, that's everyone else's problem. You're not
Correct.
doing anything, and so that's why I find it very frustrating. They don't ever answer the question properly, or they look at a political angle behind it, when actually you're raising it because you want to see what's best for the town.
I do feel that, and I do feel this sometimes, is that, you know, I haven't been involved as a councillor for very much, my 4th year as a councillor, but I honestly feel that us Conservatives on the council, even though we're in opposition, we want to see a better Ipswich, and we want to see Ipswich being transformed. It seems to me that the Labour councillors, all they're interested in is just remaining in power. It seems to me that they have a meeting once a year saying, right, what's our goal for the year? Our goal for the year is to be in power this time next year. Not our goal for the year is to make Ipswich residents this much better off, or this much happier, or the place that much better place to live. It's, let's remain in power for another 12 months. And it seems to be their sole aim. They've been in power now for 8 years in Ipswich, and it doesn't seem to me to be for them to have ever had any kind of goal or ambition for where they want to take Ipswich. And I see Ipswich, I looked at the budget and compared it to our last budget in 2011. They're very similar.
Yeah.
There's nothing new. There's no new schemes. There's no new, any exciting new projects for Ipswich. And I just feel that they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to come up with anything that might be mildly controversial, because it might lose them the power. And they're so interested in keeping hold of the power that they're forgetting the reason that they're actually in power in the first place is to serve the people of Ipswich.
And that's why it's depressing. From someone like me who really, really wants to be a part of this for the right reasons, I look at somewhere like Ipswich where it's going to be very difficult for us to become the main party for the borough, mainly because of the way our system works. With the elections in thirds, but also it's, you know, you've got these people that have got this level of power that aren't doing what they should be doing, and as much as I think you guys are great as an opposition, there's not a great deal because of your numbers that you can do to change that. And so you go to this meeting where they're like, oh, look how amazing we are, but anytime I speak to a Labour councillor, whether it's on Twitter or in real life, and I say, what is your legacy? What are you going to leave Ipswich with? They can't answer that. I said that about their MP. What is your legacy here? And there isn't one. And I just think that's such a disrespect to the privilege of being. And
I suppose that you've echoed exactly what I'm saying. You know, being the group leader, I often think, what would happen if we were in power and I was all of a sudden leader of the council? And do you know what? I have a plan in my head. You know, I'm miles away from being leader of the council, but I have a plan in my head. I know what I'd do on day 1, I know what I'd do on day 2, day 3, day 4. I know what my vision would be. I know where I want to take, where I would want to take Ipswich, and I know what route I'd take it down, and I've got projects that I know people would be interested in. And that's what seems to be lacking. But a lot of that is because, you know, and I know this is straight off the full council meeting, but I feel as though I have to get it in. You've had a very similar group of people who've been running Ipswich for too long now, and they're the same tired old faces coming up with the same tired old ideas. And I'm not going to mention anybody by name here, because that's not what I'm here to do, because these people have got Ipswich at heart, and they do believe they're doing the right thing. So it's wrong to obviously hold these people up and perhaps publicly chastise them and name and shame them, as it were, because they're not doing it for the wrong reasons. But it's about time Ipswich had some fresh ideas and fresh faces and fresh people at the table, different people that aren't tainted by the disasters that have befit this town over the last few years. You know, how anybody that had anything to do with the Cornhill could have anything to do with the planning of the next public realm, which is Arras Square, is beyond me. Now, when I challenged this at council, the Labour group said, "Oh, we're going to run it exactly the same way as we did the Cornhill." I wanted them to have a public competition on designing. I wanted them to have and then it goes to a shortlist, and then the public actually get a vote on it. I want to have a rule in the council, if the council spend more than £1 million on anything, that the public get a say in whether it should take place or not, because it's their money. It's their money we're spending, and then perhaps you would get a little bit more of what the public want, rather than what this small group, this small cabal of people at the top in various different organisations think that the people in Ipswich want, because I think these people are out of touch.
I've got a controversial question to ask you, and that is about Cornhill. Are you as shocked as I am that Ellesmere is still there as leader, bearing in mind Cornhill and the absolute disaster and waste of money that was? He just seems to be, well, it is what it is. Are you shocked that there hasn't been...
David Ellesmere is a wily politician. He's been around for a long time. Yes, we have some clashes in the council, but I've got a lot of respect for him. I knew that when I took on the leader's role, I was told of what a good politician he was. I'd have a tough job coming up against him, which I do. He knows his stuff. He's got Ipswich at heart, whether I may disagree with with the way he does it. I think the main reason he's still the leader of the Ipswich Labour group is the fact that nobody else wants it.
Okay.
I don't see any ambition on their benches. Like I say, I've been a councillor for 4 years now, and there are councillors on those benches I've never heard speak.
Well, there are councillors who barely turn up to their meetings.
Well, but I've never heard them speak.
Yeah.
I think he does very well at keeping the people who have perhaps got a little bit of ambition on the top table and giving them a lot of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
If you not notice, he takes a back seat a lot. So he's the leader of the council, but you go to every council meeting during the year, he doesn't speak as much as some of the other councillors do. Because he gives them, so I think that's how he does it. He gives them some authority. And I think that way, that's what's kept him in power. And the fact that Ipswich hasn't got a strong momentum branch. There are very left-wing people in that group, but I don't think they've got enough support to oust Councillor Ellesmere.
Okay, interesting. Because I expected him to resign, but I think that's possibly because I'm so used to little mistakes being made by, I'm not saying this was a little mistake, but generally in politics and people having to resign because there's public outrage.
I was
like, he's going.
I can't see him ever resigning.
So you've got Ellesmere for quite
So, that was our Tory Talks.
Yeah.
How do you think it went?
I think it was all right.
I think it's all right. I think it's interesting. I think what we should do is open up a little bit. I mean, I can talk for an hour on any subject because I just like talking. But I think if there's anybody that listens or watches this that has got a subject that they think they want us to talk about, then we should be prepared to talk about it. But certainly I look forward to the next episode.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.